Well, thank you very much for coming out today. I can see the power of free cookies is still, doesn't just work for undergraduates, so we're glad you're all here. Given our revenue situation, we probably should have charged admissions at the door. Maybe we could have hired another faculty member or coach or something for next year. Well, thank you very much for coming out today. I look forward to getting a chance to talk to you about the situation at the university. I think that somehow the state of the university feels a little bit kind of heavy. We're going to have a conversation about the university. It's not quite as serious as the state of the university, but we also had a little bit of a miscommunication. I think we at one point said this was going to be an interview. I think Mary Ann Benninger at the end of her decade of service chose to do an interview format with her conversation with the folks at St. Ben's a couple weeks ago, and we were thinking about that model, and we decided that we would wait until I was actually ready to retire for that one. So not anytime soon, I hope. Well, so one of the interesting things over the past, so I'm in year 2 of my position here at St. John's, coming back after being away for 30 plus years. And one of the things that I'm often asked by alums and friends, you know, how's year 2 going? How are things going at St. John's? And, you know, the specific question is sort of how does year 2 compare to year 1? Well, you know, there are upsides and downsides. So year 1 had a bit of a fire hose feel to it. Just lots of stuff coming at you, lots of new faces and information and challenges to try to understand and wrap your head around. And as you know, this is a place where we've got some complicated institutional dynamics. We've got the Abbey, and we've also got the College of St. Benedict in addition to the university. And so trying to understand all those relationships was a bit of a challenge, and in a good way, the first year. You know, so the second year, one of the upsides of the second year is it feels like you have a little more control over the situation. You can say, okay, I've seen this event before, let's tweak it a little bit, or I don't think I need to do that particular event. So that's one of the nice sides about the second year. On the other hand, there's some challenges to the second year. In the first year, people are very generous. They forgive you all kinds of sins. You know, you meet someone for the 6th time, and you say, nice to meet you, and they say, very gently and kindly, you know, we've actually met 5 times before, but it's nice to see you again as well. In year 2, they're too polite to say it, but you can kind of see in their eyes when you've met them before and you say, nice to meet you, that they're thinking, what is wrong with his memory, you know, already? And the other issue is that you haven't had enough time to make people unhappy. In the first year, if you say no to things that have to do with resources and that sort of thing, they might think, well, okay, maybe that was Father Bob that did that. He put that budget in place. But in year 2, it's all on you. So the honeymoon's over, and some of you out there can attest to that probably. But don't say anything to your neighbors. Let's be Benedictine if we can. The other thing about year 2 is I thought that I could play out the new guy card for a little while longer. But on July 1, I mean, both the new guy and the younger guy, no offense, Mary Ann, you know, but on July 1, suddenly I get to be the veteran, which I'll try to figure out how to milk that for all it's worth. And I also become the old guy by about more than a decade, given that my new colleague at St. Ben's seems like she just graduated from high school recently. No, just very talented, someone in her 40s having this job is very striking. So in any case, year 2 has been great. It's been great to continue to be at St. John's, and you know, we have some issues and challenges which I want to talk a little bit about, but the short of it is it continues to be a fabulous community to be part of, and the things that we do for our students, that you all do for our students, continue to amaze me. The chances that I have to get to go out to talk to alums and our friends and parents. Parents, you know, are some of our biggest fans. Especially this time of the year when they're getting ready to graduate and there are no more tuition payments, they're especially happy. But, you know, they say incredible things about what you all have done for their children. And that makes this job, and I hope all of your jobs, easy to do, because we really do transform lives in ways that are quite amazing. Now, there are 3 things that I want to touch on today that are affecting all of us. And it's a little interesting, you look at the calendar, it's the end of April, and so it might have been wiser to wait one more week to see the true state of the university, because this is a very busy week for all of us. As you may know, May 1 is the deadline for deposits to the university, and so literally a week from now we'll have more data on exactly how many young men we'll have with us next fall as part of the first year class. But in a lot of ways, the things that we face this year, which are maybe a particular challenge this year, but they're not unique to this year. They're the challenges that we're going to face over the next decade, probably, in higher education in general, and at St. John's and St. Ben's in particular. So I want to touch on three of those and comment on them and see how I think that they have an impact on the kinds of things that we would do here at St. John's and St. Ben's going forward. The first factor affecting us is demographics. You know, it's the old joke that, you know, they don't make any more 18-year-olds. They had to start making 18-year-olds, you know, 18 years and 9 months ago. So we don't have any more 18-year-olds coming on the scene right now. We know exactly the number of students that are available to look at St. John's and St. Ben's and other schools like us. We've known that for a while because you can look at the demographics of the upper Midwest and the demographics of Minnesota. And the demographics are not great. We're in a slightly demographically challenged part of the country. The only place that's probably more demographically challenged is the Northeast. They have some of their own issues in terms of the number of college students entering these in the next years. Minnesota graduates peaked in 2010, and then they've dropped off by about 8% to a nadir this year in 2014. So this is the smallest graduating class in Minnesota in a lot of years at least. And so we've got a lot of competition for those Minnesota students. Now, you all know we have students from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, but Minnesota is absolutely our bread and butter and will continue to be our bread and butter. We're 80% Minnesotan. That's too high in the long run, but I'll touch on that in a second. So we've got a demographic challenge about the number of students in Minnesota and the upper Midwest as well. It's not as if North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin provide a lot of relief from that demographic challenge. They're in the same situation we're in. So we have a smaller number of students available to compete, to bring in for our first year class, and we're competing with lots of other institutions for those young men and young women at St. Ben's, though interestingly, the situation at St. Ben's is a little bit less challenging because there are more young women going to college than young men in percentage terms, and St. Ben's has done a good job of attracting those young women. The second challenge that we face is that the makeup of students looking at college these days is a little bit different ethnically and racially than it has been historically for us. We are very much, have very much been historically through our time a kind of white, middle-class, Central Minnesotan, Twin Cities-based institution. Lots of Central Minnesota kids still come to St. John's and St. Ben's, but the share of those young men and young women coming to St. John's and St. Ben's that are Caucasian now is smaller than it was historically. If you look at the growth in high school populations in Minnesota, it's going to be relatively flat for a while. We're not going to get back to the 2010 numbers of total graduates until about 2024. But interestingly, if you look at the makeup of that growth over the next decade or so, it's going to be made up more of non-traditional students, more African American students, more Hispanic students, more Asian American students. And those are students that have not always been an important part of our makeup. In fact, they have not typically been a very important part of our makeup, just given our history and our location. And so we need to think about those challenges as we go forward, and I'll touch on that in just a second in a little more detail. And then finally, the third issue. So we've got overall demographics, we've got the racial and ethnic makeup of the population of college students that are looking at liberal arts schools. And then finally, we have the issue of the value proposition. There's been a lot of question in the press. If you follow any of the higher education, in fact, you can't really miss it, even if you don't follow the higher education literature. If you read the Strib or the St. Cloud Times on a regular basis, there are all kinds of stories in there about higher education and whether higher education continues to be a good investment and whether that investment is something you should continue to pursue going forward. There have even been people that have claimed that going to college is not a good idea. Now, that's a crazy notion, as I'll touch on in a second, but that's part of the question that's being asked out there in the world these days, is whether higher education is still a good value. What do you get? And related to that question is, if you're going to do higher education, what should you invest in? What kind of education should you get? Should residential liberal arts experience like we provide at St. John's and St. Ben's, is that what you should opt for? Should you do something more vocationally oriented? Is that a better way to spend your money, a better way to make an investment? There are even options, they're pretty few and far between at this point, but there are even online options, where technology might provide some challenges for us as well. So there's some real debates about whether our model of higher education will continue to be one that makes sense going forward. Well, let me touch on these briefly in turn. The Midwest absolutely does provide a challenge to us geographically and demographically. But it's important to remember that if you look at the data, the demand for liberal arts education has remained relatively strong even over the past 5 or 6 years. The last 5 or 6 years, we've been in the midst of a recession initially and then an economic slowdown compared to what we've seen in the last 20 years. And so, you might think, okay, in this model of education, it's not so clear that there's going to continue to be a demand for liberal arts education in this world. Well, the data suggests that the number of students pursuing liberal arts education, by that I mean the kind of broad-based education that we provide at St. Ben's and St. John's, the number of students pursuing liberal arts education has stayed stable and has even grown slightly at the national level. And in the Midwest, if you look just at the number of, there are 8 true liberal arts schools in the state of Minnesota. St. John's, St. Ben's, Gustavus, St. Olaf, Carleton, McAllister. Who am I missing? No, not St. Catherine's. Concordia, Moorhead. We're up to 8. Not Hamlin, and Morris. I think that gets us up to 8. Hamlin technically is not. A little more. The way you define a liberal arts school in these things is if 50% or more of your graduates pursue majors in the arts and sciences, so in the traditional liberal arts fields. So in Minnesota, of those 8 liberal arts schools, enrollment has been stable over the past 5 years. Even in an economy where family incomes have not grown a whole lot, even though there's been a lot of pressure to ask questions about whether vocational training is a better way to go, we've maintained our market share even in a slightly declining market over the past 5 years. So I think that there's still a strong demand for what we provide, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to think about being more geographically diverse. That's absolutely going to be something that we need to focus on going forward. We need to figure out how to attract young men from other parts of the country to come to St. John's to pursue their education. And that has challenges in that Minnesota is often, if folks outside of in other parts of the country hear Minnesota, it's often on the Weather Channel, and that's not the best marketing in the world. I mean, even today doesn't provide a lot of counter to that example. It's late April and it still feels like February. So we need to figure out how to increase our geographic diversity across the country, and we've had some success with that already. We've had a number of initiatives in admissions to help attract students from other parts of the country. The athletic department has reached out to young men from other parts of the country as well and done a great job of attracting young men from Texas, Arizona, California. Those are all great trends for us going forward, but attracting those students, as those of you that have tried to do this have discovered, it's harder than it is to attract someone from Sartell or from Lakeville or from Mankato. They don't know St. John's as well, they don't know Minnesota as well, and so that's going to take some additional work on our part. Many of you have been called in to help with admissions things. Faculty and staff have been very generous with their time in helping the admissions office attract students to come to St. John's and St. Ben's, and have given freely of your time when students have been visiting on campus to show what a great personalized, holistic education our students are going to get here. But that's going to continue. We're going to require additional help. The admissions process is going to be led by the admissions office, of course, but it's going to be all hands on deck in some ways as we try to attract students from other parts of the country. The second piece of this challenge has to do with the diversity in our student population, and in lots of ways this is an incredible opportunity, and in some ways we've had great success already. About 10 years ago, American students of color at St. John's were 4% of our enrollment. A decade later, the American students of color now represent 16% of our undergraduate population, and if you add about 5% international students on top of that, we have over 20% of our students that are not part of our traditional demographic at St. John's. And that's a fabulous outcome. That's a great thing. It provides exceptional opportunities for those young men to get a great liberal arts education, but it also provides an exceptional opportunity for the students that come from our traditional backgrounds, for that young man from St. Cloud or that young man from Burnsville, to be exposed to a world that maybe he hasn't seen a whole lot of before as he was growing up in Minnesota. So that diversity is a great thing for us. I think it provides a representation of the world that our students are going to be living in when they graduate. But it provides some challenges for us as well. It provides a couple issues. One has to do with cost. Those young men are often more expensive. They don't come from families that have quite the same economic means that some of our other families do. And so we need to find ways to help support those young men once they're here. And the second issue for that group, and this is also true of the more geographically diverse students as well, has to do with retention. We have a fabulous record when it comes to retention, among the best in our group of schools, much higher than what you would predict if you looked at the demographics of St. John's and St. Ben's. We've been up near 90% in retention from first to second year. And that's often the year in which we have students decide to transfer or go somewhere else for school or drop out. So that number has come down a little bit in the past year or two, partly because we're more geographically diverse and more ethnically diverse. Those young men find getting dropped into the woods of central Minnesota to be a little bit more of a challenge than it is for our Minnesota students. And so what we need to do, and what many of you have already done, is to reach out to these young men and help them figure out that this is a good place for them to be, that this is a place for them to spend the next 4 years and get a great education. And even as they're trying to adjust to being away from home and being in this new culture, the hospitality that we offer is real and genuine, and that can end up serving us incredibly well going forward as we have this more increasingly diverse student population. And again, that's something that all of you have already, many of you have already stepped up and helped with, but we're going to continue to need the help in that regard. And this is literally every single one of you, in the sense that all of you in some ways interact with students, and the ways in which you make them feel welcome here and at home here makes a huge difference. A lot of our students that come from these more diverse backgrounds have work-study jobs, so you get a chance to work with them in your offices and in other places that they work on campus. And the degree to which they are made to feel welcome, not only in the classroom and in the dormitories, but in all parts of campus life, can help them feel more comfortable and will encourage them to stay here to complete their education. And it's not only the right thing for us to do economically, because it's a good thing for us financially to help these young men stay here, but it's also the right thing to do ethically. We want to, if we're going to recruit young men to come here, we want them to make sure that they can succeed here, that they feel comfortable here and they can complete the academic work here as our traditional students have done. So that increasing diversity calls on all of us to be involved in helping with that retention challenge that we face going forward. And if you've got suggestions or ideas in ways in which we can make that retention piece work better, let us know. That's something we're working on quite literally right now. It's something we're trying to make sure works for students even as we try to get them to come back next year. So that diversity presents a challenge, but I think we're well suited to address that challenge given our great history and our tradition with regard to hospitality here. Finally, the value proposition is one that is not an easy one to address. We are an expensive model of higher education. We're a people-driven model. We have great faculty and great staff, many of whom have tremendous educations and lots of additional experience, and that makes you expensive. But that's because you're good at what you do. The challenge going forward for us is to try to figure out how to balance off the cost challenges that we face, to be fair to all of you, to provide the right market-driven compensation, to make sure that you're being treated well and this is a place you want to come and make your career. But that has to be balanced off against the real demands we're facing in the marketplace to keep tuition under control. You all, our human capital, is our most expensive piece of this model, but we're getting a lot of pressure from the market that says the tuition increases that we've had in place over the last 20 to 25 years in higher education are probably not going to be able to be continued. If average, and I don't have the exact data, but if tuition has risen 4 to 5% on average over the past 20 plus years, it just is very unlikely that that's going to be able to continue going forward. And so we face real economic pressures. Even if we meet our class, even if we attract the students that we need, our ability to offer real compensation increases to faculty and staff flies in the face of trying to keep tuition costs down for our families. And so it's a balancing act. We do what we can every year to try to keep costs down. At the same time, we're trying to be fair to our faculty and staff and to continue to provide the superb quality education that we do provide. As many of you know, so many of the parents in the room here, you got letters from us recently about The tuition increase next year, was the lowest increase in 25 years. We worked very hard to keep that cost down, but that was still a net comprehensive fee increase at St. John's of about 4%. If inflation is 2%, tuition goes up 4%, that's still a real increase in the cost to our families. And so we need to work on that challenge. And I'll at the risk of turning this into an economics lecture, this is something that we all face in higher education. But one of the things that we need to figure out how to do here is to try to increase productivity, find ways to bring costs down. At the same time, we try to be fair to you all in terms of the compensation that we offer. And many of you have helped with that already. You may be working in offices where we've made some shuffling around of, when people have left, we've restructured things and you found yourself doing the same work with fewer people. That's a real productivity increase that allows us to save some money, but it also imposes real costs on you. There's no question that unless we had people that were sitting around not doing much, when someone leaves and we ask you to pick up some of their responsibilities, that imposes additional costs on you and makes your job a little bit more challenging maybe than it was previously. But we need that kind of help. We need you all to step up and help with that piece of the economic puzzle so that we can continue to try to offer the quality that we provide at a cost that our families can afford. Now, again, we're no worse off in that regard than any other place. Almost every place in higher education, and we could even extend it to things like healthcare that have some of the same challenges. So we need to work on that. It's not something that we don't know exists, as it has been a problem for education and healthcare for a long time now, but we're getting more pressure in the marketplace so that our ability to raise the price through tuition, to get additional revenue to cover our expenses, is not quite as easy as it might have been a decade or so ago. Now, I don't think that we need to worry that our ability to raise tuition is going to go away. I think families do understand that we provide a great education and a great opportunity for their sons and for their daughters at St. Ben's. So I don't think that the economic model is broken, but the economic model is under pressure in a way that wasn't true a decade ago, and we just need to be aware of that. And many of you have seen that in your own departments, and we will see that going forward. So what is the summary? What do things look like for us going forward? Well, three obvious things, I think. We're likely to be a little bit smaller, I think, as the demographic challenges arrive at St. John's and St. Ben's. The long-run enrollment is probably going to be a little bit smaller than we are right now. I would guess we're probably going to end up around 1,800 students. Don't take that one to the bank necessarily, but I think we're going to be a little bit smaller than we have been. We peaked at close to 1,900 students 4 or 5 years ago. We were at about 1,800 students in the late 90s. So I don't think that it's a huge problem for us to go back to that number, but it will require some adjustments in terms of staff and faculty if we lose 100 students compared to where we were at our peak. But I think given the demographics, we're likely to be smaller. Secondly, we're likely to be more diverse. That has lots of great opportunities that go with it, but it has some challenges as well, and we're going to need to learn to adjust to a more diverse student body that comes from a different background and has different economic issues than we might have had historically. And then thirdly, we're just going to face continued economic pressure. There's no easy way around that. I think it's really important that we maintain the model that we have. I mean, one thing we could do, I suppose, there's talk about saying, well, why don't you simply change your model? Rather than having 25 students in a class with one faculty member, or rather than having one counselor for every 300 students, why don't you have 30 students in a class? Why don't you have 500 students per counselor or per financial aid officer? Why don't you shut down some square footage, and so you don't need as much staff to keep it up? Well, we could do all those things, but it would change the nature of what we provide our students. And I think, especially when it comes to you all, the contact with students in the classroom and out of the classroom is what makes this a quality experience. And so if we change that mix, the student-faculty mix, the student-staff mix, that changes the nature of what we provide our students. And that isn't to say that we don't have to do some of that. We can't stay exactly where we've been historically. We probably do have to make some adjustments in those areas. But I think that before we make dramatic changes in student-to-faculty ratios and staff-to-faculty ratios, student-to-faculty ratios and student-to-staff ratios, we want to think very carefully about what kind of changes we could undertake that would allow us to save money and be more productive without having fewer people for our students to interact with. But that's an ongoing challenge. You're all going to be asked to be part of this conversation in the years ahead. But I think that it's something that we can address without fundamentally changing what we offer our students. Finally, though, I would note, there's another option, which would be to change the nature of what we provide. We are a residential liberal arts Catholic Benedictine institution. I talked about that a year ago at this time. We could become a different sort of place. We could try to provide graduate programs. We could offer more vocational offerings than we currently do. We could change the nature of the education at St. John's and St. Ben's. But I think there still is significant demand for that education among parents and students. And I think that just as a practical matter, it is by far the best education that's available for talented high school students in the United States today. I don't see any reason for us to change who we are fundamentally. I think we need to take that model and be more efficient to the degree that we can do that. But I think we need to have confidence that the model that we provide our students at St. John's and St. Ben's continues to be a model that is in great demand out there among families and among students. I had several recent encounters that reminded me of this. These are anecdotes. This is not a full data set, which makes an economist a little nervous, but I'm happy to talk about anecdotes, because when you're a president, you can do anecdotes. So I've got my president hat on, not my economist hat on right now. So I was talking to a young man recently who's a student here as a freshman, and he said a year ago at this time he was ready to go to the University of Minnesota. He'd been accepted into their prestigious biological sciences program and thought, he'd looked around at the ratings, he'd done a lot of research on these, and he saw that the U of M was very highly rated in biological sciences, as many of you know. He thought, okay, this is a pretty great place for me to go. How could I do better than the U? He got some, nice scholarship from them, et cetera, and the costs seemed to be good. And his dad said to him, why don't you just visit St. John's and just get a chance to look at their science facilities? You've been up there before for, he had a brother that went to school here, and so he'd been up on campus before, but he had a chance to look at the biological sciences offerings that we had. So he said, all right, I'll do it, Dad. But he was pretty sure the U was where he was going. So he came up here and he met with with someone in biology who the father told me this, he spent 2 hours with this young man. This wasn't 2 hours with a current student. This was 2 hours with a prospective student. 2 hours meeting with this young man. He showed him around our science facilities. He talked to him about the research opportunities he might have if he came here as an undergraduate. And when this young man got in the car to go home, his mind was completely changed. He came to St. John's. He brought a friend with him. It's always nice. And he's having a great first year. They're trying to recruit him to do lab work, to be a lab assistant for next year's first-year students. And the problem he has is he doesn't know if that will fit in with the volunteer activities that he wants to engage in on campus. So this is a young man for whom the exposure to the great personalized, holistic liberal arts education that we provide with our faculty here, it changed his view of what education should be about and what he wanted to experience. So, you all have helped with that. Another story that was in the news, MOOCs, massive open online courses, the model that some people think is threatening residential liberal arts. MOOCs are now trying to find places for their students to gather, to talk to each other, to interact with each other academically. Well, those places exist already. They're called residential colleges. We've got one close by here. But it suggests that there's a real understanding that getting students together in one place makes a difference. It's not simply a great internet connection, and this doesn't even talk about all the kinds of learning that takes place outside the classroom. My conversations with alums and parents recently about the importance of sports in the lives of their young men that have come up here to go to school. The importance of music courses. There was Dale White is retiring. He's a brass instructor, and dozens of his students came back this weekend to give a concert. These are all brass students from the past 30 years that came back to give a concert. And they came back to honor Dale because what he did for them outside the classroom. The sorts of things that many of you do for our students outside the classroom. E-Scholars, another place where It's not a formal academic program, but it's a way in which students interact with each other and with faculty and alums outside the classroom. Another great experience for them. And the other interesting thing that I discovered recently, we had a story in the alumni magazine about Ginger Dulles and Bill Patefield, who were both recent retirees, and we had a little profile honoring them. And we included very thoughtfully the email addresses for these folks if students and alums wanted to contact them just to say congratulations. Well, we got this amazing flurry of notes being sent to Ginger and Bill from student workers who'd spent time working with them while they were on campus, and they talked about how important that work-study job was for their experience at St. John's. And again, this is what dozens of you do on a daily basis. You interact with our students, but what you don't always know is how important that is to them. They don't always tell you, they're not always that good about articulating the appreciation that they have, but they absolutely do value that experience. And all of that is a function of being a residential campus, which is what we will continue to be. Even though some of our students wish they could live off campus a little bit more easily, that's not where we're going. The students are going to have this residential requirement going forward because we think that the community that's formed on campus is a very important part of their experience. A third anecdote. I met a mom at an admissions event recently, and I asked her, if there's any previous family connection to St. John's, and she said no one in the family had ever gone to St. John's. So I asked her, well, why is it that your son is looking at St. John's? What is it that you think is a good fit for him? And she said, well, I know a lot of Johnnies and Bennies at the place that I work, and they are to a person just great people, ethical, thoughtful, considerate, and also they kind of look out for each other in a way that is really impressive, not in a way that's off-putting to others, but there's this network that is clearly very powerful among Johnnies and Bennies. And I want my son to have that opportunity. So the Benedictine, the community piece that we foster on campus, that our alums take out into the world and continue to live when they go out into the cities and other places, that network that they create, that's an important part of our Benedictine heritage. It's not true at other places. Other alums are loyal to their institutions, but that sense of community that we develop here is truly exceptional. And that's something that makes us different from even lots of other great residential liberal arts colleges. So that's something that we have, that we will continue to foster, and that our students and our parents are going to continue to appreciate. And then finally, I had a chance to talk to an alum recently about his experience after having left St. John's. And what he said, and he echoed what a number of other alums have said, he said, when I was a student, I didn't fully appreciate the Catholic Benedictine piece of what happened at St. John's. I kind of took for granted that the monastics living in the dormitory, would be there to talk to me about ethical issues. I took for granted that the training I got in my theology classes, and I got in my ethics classes, I just took that as part of my education. But what I've come to discover is, as I've gotten further into life, I've gone back to those things much more often than I ever imagined I would. When it comes to how to behave in my career, when it comes to making decisions about how to live my life and what sorts of choices I should make professionally and personally, that ethical Catholic Benedictine experience I had at St. John's continues to be very powerful to me, even into my 40s. And he said that it had continued to grow through his 20s and into his 40s, not that he was suddenly discovering in his 40s. So this is something that many of our students take away from St. John's. They don't always know that they take it away, and it's a little bit of a hard thing to sell to a 17-year-old when they're looking at a college, to say, well, we're going to offer you a great experience that you're going to really appreciate when you're 35. That's not their time horizon, but it is what we do as an institution. It's one of the things that truly makes us unique among the great residential liberal arts colleges that I know anything about. They do lots of things similar to us, but that Catholic Benedictine piece, that kind of ethical piece, the framework and foundation for their lives, that's rare. And again, every single one of you contributes to that in big ways and small. And so I think that the things that we offer our students will continue to be exactly what they need, and I even think that the marketplace will reward that. We will continue to get the students we need going forward because of the great things that you do. Now, I want to just touch briefly, so this was focusing mainly on the undergraduate college, but I also want to note the other two pieces of St. John's University that are very important. One is a School of Theology, and the other is Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. The School of Theology faces some of the same demographic challenges we face, but in an interesting way, they face an even greater set of challenges in that the overall demand for graduate theological education has gone down. If you look at what's happened in the U.S. for undergraduate education, it's not that there's been a drop in the demand for that education. It's simply been that the number of young men and young women graduating from high school has come down some. And so the share of those young men and young women going on to college has not changed. In fact, it's gone up a little bit. It's just that we're weighing that off against an overall decline in the population. With the Graduate School of Theology, it's actually a little bit more of a challenge in that the overall demand for theological education has come down some. And so they face real challenges in terms of attracting the number of students that they need to come and fill our classrooms in the School of Theology. But again, I think that the models that we have here, the great Catholic education that we offer students in the School of Theology, the great demand for service in our churches around the country for Catholic lay people that are going to be serving in roles of leadership going forward, will make the School of Theology continue to be a place that will attract students going forward. But I want to just note that they face some of the same challenges that we face, and you all in big ways and small interact with their students. It's a much smaller population, of course, than it is with our undergraduates, but you interact with them as well. And thank you for helping make them feel welcome and comfortable here at St. John's as we continue to try to attract those students in the future to make sure that our School of Theology continues to be strong and healthy. The seminary is also a place you probably have a little bit less role in attracting seminarians, but if you know anyone that wants to be a priest, tell them to come on down. We can provide a great education for them. Unfortunately, their bishops have a little more say in that than you might, but we're working on that piece too. We have a nice Johnny that's bishop in St. Cloud, so we're hoping he'll send us some seminarians sometime soon as well. And then finally, Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. It's about to celebrate its 50th anniversary in a couple of years. This has been a kind of a well-kept secret on campus. I'll admit I was kind of clueless when I was a student. I would walk by the alcove around the corner, and I knew that there was something down around the corner in the library, but I didn't ever bother to visit it when I was an undergraduate. But it's been doing incredible work over 50 years, saving manuscripts and preserving culture from all around the world. They continue to do great work. You may recall a story about a year ago where we thought that all the manuscripts in Timbuktu had been destroyed because of a civil war there. Well, it turns out that some of the wise curators in Timbuktu had hidden those manuscripts, and now Hill Museum and Manuscript Library is making digital photographs to preserve those manuscripts going forward. So in terms of preserving world culture, this little place in the woods in central Minnesota is doing some amazing things. One thing that you will notice about them this summer is that they're undergoing a renovation of their space in Alcuin. So you're going to see some construction going on at Hill Museum and Manuscript Library this summer. We hope to have the renovation done by the end of the summer so that in the fall, when our students come back, they will have a chance to take advantage of some of the resources that are down there in Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. So let me just conclude by saying, the model that we've had over the past 150 years of changing young men's lives through residential Catholic liberal arts Benedictine education is still the model that I think is the right model for us. Nothing that I've seen in the last 2 years has made me doubt for a second that that's the right model. In fact, I've become more convinced that that's what we need to do to provide our students with a transformative education. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges that we're not all going to face together, but we are doing the right thing. We've got a great mission and a great model, and we will continue to be the great place that we've been for the past 150 years. I had the chance last night to have dinner with 7 faculty members who were getting ready to retire. And between those 7, they had something like, a quick back of the envelope calculation told me that they had about 250 years of education of working at St. John's and St. Ben's. Now, it doesn't hurt when you have some that have been around for 50 plus years like Bob Dumonso, but even the youngsters in the crowd had 30 plus years of service to these institutions. And to hear them talk about the lives that they've had here, the careers that they've had here, and the students that they've interacted with over the past decades made me incredibly proud to be part of this institution, and it should make all of you proud as well. All of you touched those lives in the same way that those faculty members did. You've transformed lives for the decades that you've been here, and will continue to do that going forward. Thank you very much. So if you have other things you want to do or you want to grab another cookie, you're welcome to. But I'm also willing to stay around, answer questions. If you have questions about anything that has to do with the university that I'd be happy to take a stab at, or if I don't know the answer, I can maybe point to someone in the audience that I could put on the spot. Mary?
There has been some talk about finding out from the students who are both international and other than Minnesota students.
Right.
What is keeping them here? What are we finding out?
Right, so the question is, all right, forget this. So the question had to do with our increasingly diverse student body, the non-traditional students, if you will, the geographically diverse students, our international students, our more ethnically diverse students. What is it that's keeping them here? Or the flip side of that, I mean, we tend to ask the question slightly differently. If they stay around, we don't tend to ask that question as much. Is if they leave, I mean, we sort of assume, by revealed preference, if they're still here, they must like what we're doing. But we do ask the question more explicitly when students choose to leave. We ask, what is it that's causing you to decide to go somewhere else for school or to drop out? Is John McGee here? I could wing this, but maybe John could give us a quick summary of the data. I mean, the short of it is, the one nice thing is it doesn't always appear, it's not so much an economic issue. We do a pretty good job of helping students stay here economically, but there's some other issues. John, do you want to take a stab at this? I know you don't have a microphone. And is this?
No, that's okay. I'm going to take a stab at retention generally because the question about international students, I don't actually have that data. But in terms of retention, well, I'll talk about St. John's and St. Ben's. When we look at who doesn't stay, who's eligible to stay, it generally breaks out for St. John's around two primary reasons. The first is academic performance, which does not mean that those who left failed out. By the way, you need to maintain a 2.0 grade point average to remain in good standing at St. Ben's and St. John's. But it does mean that at some point for some students, more likely with men than women, they see the writing on the wall and they leave. The second most prevalent reason for leaving St. John's is financial, which isn't always an issue of straight up income. It can be an issue of just whether the family believes there's financial value. But those are the two most prevalent reasons at St. John's. At St. Ben's, interestingly enough, those are the bottom two reasons that they leave. The primary reasons that students don't retain at St. Ben's have to do with essentially personal reasons or health-related issues, which is curious. So what we have is two different issues at each institution, and we have to take them on separately and independently to deal with it. I hope that answered that question.
That was brilliant, except that you undercut my argument about the economics. But it's good to have the truth. So we need to think about the financial piece for young men a little bit, though as John said, it's not always, we work pretty hard to find aid packages to help make this possible for families to attend. I think sometimes the financial piece ends up being used as an excuse for some people when they're choosing not to stay. But we need to definitely be aware of that piece. But as John pointed out, the important thing to note here is that young men and young women have different sets of issues. And I think that's actually one of the real strengths of our slightly bizarre model. We are the only coordinate relationship that I know of in higher ed, which might make you ask, why is that? But let's not ask that one today. But I think one of the nice things about being two separate institutions with this coordinate academic relationship is that we can do things for young women to help them find the right reasons for staying around. And for young men, it's a slightly different set of issues, and we can have programming directly related to that. And so we have a retention committee at St. John's whose job it is to help us understand the issues that John raised and for us to try to get out in front of those issues for young men. And this is actually a place where there's a little bit of a role for each of you. It's not your job to retain students and to be engaging in counseling or any of that sort of thing. But if you are working with a student and they seem to be struggling a bit, either socially or if there's a financial issue and the family's circumstances change, we'll try to meet those concerns with the family. But if they're struggling academically and they're not quite sure what to do, you've got some ability to help direct them to the right resources. And if you're not sure whom to direct them to, call somebody and ask, and we'll figure out who it is that we can direct that student to. Because I think the sooner we get out in front of these things, especially for our non-traditional students who may not have the same kind of resources to draw upon, if they're first-generation students and maybe don't have parents that have negotiated this college thing, they may not know exactly where to go and what resources are available to them. So this is a way in which all of you can help a little bit by helping us get out in front of these things as best we can. One last comment about the academic things at St. John's. I want to note that we have not chosen at this point to change our academic standards for admissions. One of the things we could do demographically is to say, all right, there are, we accept about just over 75% of our applicants, at least among young men. So there are about 25% that we choose not to admit. And if we wanted to, we could look at that lower tail academically and say, all right, we're going to let more of those students in. And we've made a conscious decision not to do that because we think that anyone that we admit, we want to make sure that they can do the work at St. John's successfully and get done in 4 years. And we want to make sure that they will engage once they get here. And we don't want a classroom situation where we've got a bimodal distribution where we've got students that are performing and we have those that are bringing up the rear. That's no fun for anybody in the classroom, faculty or students. And so we've thought about this very consciously. What should we do in terms of admissions, and have not chosen to change our standards. So the young men and young women you see are at least as strong as they have been previously, and we don't think that's going to change in the short run. Now, I would never say never. I don't want to say that we will never do that, but we will think long and hard before we make that decision. And some of our competitors have done that. I won't name names, but there are some places that have decided, especially for young men, and this is the hard part for us. Young men, as you probably know, are a much smaller percentage of undergraduates than young women, and so the students that we're interested in are also students that our competitors are very interested in. They want to make sure that the balance between men and women at places like Gustavus and St. Thomas, et cetera, stays relatively balanced, and the group that they're finding it harder to attract, as is true in all of higher education, is young men. So the young men that we admit find themselves to be very attractive to other schools that are our competitors, and that's part of the challenge that we face. But, we're happy to go head-to-head with those guys. We do okay. Other questions, comments, observations? Please.
I'd like to begin first by thanking you, Michael, for taking the time to bring us up to date. You had a similar opportunity a few weeks ago with the faculty with the Michael and Marianne show.
Right.
At the
It's the Marianne and Michael show.
At the time, I had a perception that some of the metrics that we have stuck to for a while, the 71 percentile for salaries, the 12-to-1 student-faculty ratio that you mentioned earlier this afternoon, and the 80-20 tenure track, adjunct kind of split. At the time, I had the perception that maybe our commitment to this, while not exactly jello, was not maybe as rock solid as some of us would hope. And I wondered if you could clarify how jello-like are we on with regard to these metrics?
I used to tell my students that the answer to virtually any question that has economics in it is, it depends. And that answer is relevant here. So by the way, did everyone hear the question? So there's a question about metrics, and this is relevant for staff as well. We have a student-to-staff ratio that's about 6.5 to 1, and there's a question about whether whether we will continue that as well. I think that your impression, I'm not speaking for Marianne at all, and I can't say anything about Mary Hinton's position on this, but I think your impression was accurate. I hope I was clear. Jello sounds a little too, that's not the metaphor that I'd like to use, but But I do think that we need to be realistic. I think all of the metrics that we have, that we try to put in place with regard to our human capital, physical capital for that matter as well, they're in service of providing a great education to our students. And they are constrained by what the market will allow us to do. Now, I don't mean to suggest that we don't have any ability to influence these things, right? We can make some choices, and we interact with the market, so we work hard to try to attract students, and we listen to what the market says, and it's an interaction that brings us the number of students that we have each year. But, as I noted in the comments earlier, I think the economic model now is different than it was a decade ago. We have less control of one of our important sources of revenue, which is tuition. I think that the market has been pretty clear in sending signals to us that tuition increases need to be modified, and that means less revenue from our students. And the flip side of that is that discount rates for our students, the amount of financial aid that we offer them, the actual net price that they pay in tuition, those discount rates have crept up as well. So it's a kind of double whammy in terms of tuition revenue. Tuition is going up at a slower rate, discount rates are going up, and you're squeezing what's left for the institution to collect. So, that doesn't mean that that's etched in stone. We are working on other sources of revenue as well, of course. We're trying to help our alums understand the challenges that we face economically, and that the model that might have existed when they were here as students 20, 30, 40 years ago isn't the same model. We don't have that lovely monastic endowment in terms of faculty that we're teaching for us at a discounted rate of 20 cents on the dollar. That just doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. We'd love to have, if you have any monks you want to bring to the community, send them on over, especially if they want to teach in the college. But, I don't mean to be flip here. I mean, this is a serious issue. So, all of those metrics, I think, need to be re-examined on a regular basis to make sure that the economic model works. At the same time, I understand that those metrics have an impact on quality. And if we change our student-faculty ratio from 12-to-1 to 13-to-1, that means fewer faculty for our students, and that affects the quality. But, if the question is, do we go from 12-to-1 to 13-to-1, or do we go out of business, or do we have compensation increases that are zero? I think I'd prefer to think about those metrics, because the other metric that's involved, you mentioned the 71st percentile for faculty. That's a goal we have for compensation. My general goal for compensation, I'm an economist. I love markets. And I think markets are really important, and I think we should pay faculty and staff market-driven compensation for the market that we're in. And if we can't do that, we start losing people, or we have people say, they're not committed to me, I'm not committed to them. And I don't want that outcome either. So, I want market-driven compensation, and so, if I have to make those trade-offs, I would focus on the compensation piece, but even that, I can't say for sure we can stick with exactly what we promised. I hope we can, but I can't tell you that for sure. I really think it depends on what we see in the market going forward. And, so was that wishy-washy enough? Was it consistently wishy-washy, I hope? Again, well, all right. I like waffles better anyway, especially with fabulous maple syrup. Yes, sir.
With regard to the changing demographics of students, are we anticipating having to provide new kinds of services or more intensive kinds of services that we aren't now? Whether it's for the ethnic groups that we're not having met their needs in the past, or remediation, or counseling or something. I don't know what to pick on, but are we doing
Sure.
it?
That's a great question. And in fact, that's a question that is the source of a lot of confusion in the criticisms of higher ed these days. Probably the most common criticism you hear, or maybe I'm just sensitive about this because of my new role, is that academic institutions are way too administratively top-heavy. You have all these new administrators and you're not hiring enough faculty, so the criticism is that administrative growth has gone up like this and faculty growth has gone up like this, or maybe been flat. I think it's a really important thing to understand that what we provide our students now is not the same education that existed 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of our students come in with a different set of needs than they had 20 or 30 years ago. Students with ADD, students with, issues of mental health, those students just wouldn't have been here 20 or 30 or 40 years ago because we didn't have the services to help them survive 4 years at an undergraduate institution. So we do provide more services now than we did 20 or 30 years ago. And I think the question you ask is a really important one. As our demographics change, are those services going to need to change with them? If we have students that come from, if we have more first-generation students, do they bring fewer resources to the table in terms of help with academic advising, career counseling, all the things that maybe our students, our middle-class students get from their families or from the networks they have in their homes? Maybe. We may need to do that. So I think that as we think about the cost of the changing demographic, it's not just their income and the tuition that they can provide and the financial aid we'll need to provide. It's, do we need to change the nature of the services that we provide those students? And, you know, this goes back a little bit to the issue of what the right metric is. There was some question, you know, we've cut a number of faculty positions for next year because of the budget challenges, and some of the faculty have said, well, wait a minute, you know, it's not all about faculty, what about staff positions? And I agree, staff questions should be on the table as well, but I also think that if we need to provide different kinds of services for our student body, it may be the case that faculty cuts and staff cuts are not going to be completely in parallel with each other. So, long-winded answer to your question. The short answer is yes, we need to ask questions about those services, and we may need to provide more. If you think about things like ESL, I mean, if we bring more international students, do we need to provide more ESL training for them? Maybe. On the other hand, we also need to make sure that students come in and have the tools to succeed here, so we can't do all the remedial things we might like to do here. That would not be appropriate either. So, like all these things, it's a balancing act, but we definitely need to be aware that those students bring a different set of needs than our traditional, you know, middle-class Caucasian students have historically. Any other questions, comments? John?
Simple question. Gustavus committed for next year to cost of living increase tuition all over 2.3%. Is that going to set the trend we're going to have to follow after that?
So the question had to do with a tuition policy that Gustavus Adolphus put in place. They promised to raise tuition only at the rate of inflation, or the rate of inflation plus a little, plus one? So
2.3% for next year.
okay, well, so I think that their stated policies that they're going to only raise tuition at the CPI plus 1%, I think is their stated policy. That's going to put pressure on us. Gustavus is a big overlap school with us, both in terms of employment. We have lots of Gusties out there, but also in terms of our students, both for men and women. Frankly, though, I don't know how they're going to do that. I think CPI plus 1 doesn't give you enough revenue to, I mean, unless you think you're going to get a huge bump in students because of that, which I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that gives you enough revenue to cover the kinds of costs that you want to cover if you want to continue to provide the same quality of education. Or what it does is it says to your faculty and staff, you're going to get CPI plus 0. So I mean, I don't exactly know what Gustavus is going to do, but if that becomes a widespread trend, we will have to address it. We can't ignore it. But they put in there was a little bit of a wiggle in that policy. I think once the policy was announced in fine print, it said it will be reviewed every year by the board or something like that. So, I mean, if one is a little cynical, you might think that is wiggle room that they might use. They have a brand new president coming in, so it's possible that makes things more complicated as well. I don't know if that allows you to wiggle, which way that allows you to wiggle, or waffle. So, but we'll know in a year, I guess. So, but I think, the more general point is, if you have schools that are using the price as and they are, and we're trying to do it as well, using price as a competitive tool vis-a-vis other institutions, we can't be oblivious to that. But I also think that we need to try to be honest with our families and our students about that price lever and the relationship that has to quality. And I think that's, it's not that we shouldn't try to keep our costs down, we absolutely should, but we also want to be honest about what the quality issues are. They're real. Unless we've got lots of people sitting around doing nothing, we can't cut people without affecting the quality some. It's a little bit too sober. Anybody have well, I'll announce 3 happy things. The men's rugby team won the national championship for the second year in a row. So again, a great example of the extracurricular things that we offer our students. The men's ultimate team is going to nationals, and the men's lacrosse team is going to nationals. And Mom Prom was a spectacular hit with all the moms, including my mom. Yes, I brought my mom to Mom Prom. So if you ever wonder if I give it all for St. John's, believe me, I did. Well, all right. I'm happy to stay around and chat. But thank you for coming out. We appreciate your time. Thanks for all the things that you do for our students. We'll continue to be an exceptional place because of you. Thanks.